All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So yesterday we actually covered a couple topics right there. Let's just look into it really quick and just remember, or at least just kind of go over some of the things. We talked about housing, and we talked about some of the details in regards to housing. We also talked about the different kinds of maintenance. We talked about maintenance for labor and delivery. We talked about maintenance for women during their waiting period. We also talked about the husband when he's incapable of giving maintenance and all of that. Oh, all right. So we went in details with some of that, but right now, I guess we're going to go into rather, I would say, a topic that is containing a lot of controversy. And we're talking about subjects like, okay, when we look at the ayah that in general, it basically is really clear that it tells us that some of the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that He had created spouses or created pairs in order to live in tranquility and love and mercy in between them, and that there are signs for people to ponder in that. So that's a very generalized, comprehensive statement, and sometimes the generalized comprehensive statement, we need some further details of one, how to make that possible, two, what does that look like, and what if things go wrong? It's so easy to say as a utopian standard of where and what we want people to live up to, but then, of course, when you put and you lay out a standard or at least a high standard that you want people to live up to, but things can go wrong. And certainly not everybody is capable, or at least is motivated, or at least is putting the efforts to really go up that high in their standard. So, of course, in those circumstances when things go wrong, we basically have the other ahadith to help us get to that standard and basically, I would say, organize the relationships of how those relationships that go wrong, how far are those limits and those boundaries and at least those parameters are in order to what? Organize the relationship to get up to that high standard, or at least put the boundaries of where's the lowest standard and where's the highest standard. So we can think of this one as the highest standard. The highest standard is basically to bring about tranquility within the household, to bring about love, to bring about mercy, to bring about this warmth in that relationship, and not necessarily the type of love of romance per se, but it is more of mawadda. The difference between the word romance and mawadda is that mawadda contains warmth. It contains that even if perhaps there isn't this type of love that, we're speaking about, some relationship that is feeling that somehow I want this person, they want me, security and feeling all that stuff, but there's a level of ishra. What is al-ishra? Al-ishra is the relationship that we basically would at least have this balance together. They and or perhaps he is feeling some need for me and I'm feeling some need for him. We basically balance each other out. Okay? That's al-ishra. We balance each other out. We had learned how to compromise with one another. They've got their shortcomings. I've got my shortcomings. And we basically just, move on and learn how to compromise with one another to balance things out. All right. Now, of course, when in general we speak about وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ and live with them بالمعروف on one, integrity, two, good terms, three, of course, il-ma'ruf to meaning basically the society, and meaning based on the terms that are within that culture. So we're speaking about good terms. فإن كرهتموهن فعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا ويجعل الله فيه خيرا كثيرا. You may hate something about for perhaps their mannerisms, perhaps their appearance, perhaps something that you may dislike, but there could be good within it. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically letting us see and live within the world that is around us, not based on looking at things with a negative eye, but looking to be hopeful that something of good that might actually result and come out of this relationship. And not everything is necessarily supposed to be working right. And this is extremely important. Not everything is necessarily supposed to be working right for us to just assume that this relationship is good or this relationship is bad. That sometimes you have to see the majority and at least most of the outcomes. Is this going towards one, bringing interest to me? What kind of benefit? What am I getting out of this relationship? Is there any good in it? And that's basically what you want to look for. But at the end of the day, of course, every single relationship, they would have to do their own homework to see whether this is bringing benefit for them or this is not bringing benefit for them, and they would have to make up their decision. They would have to be the ones to actually determine whether this is looking like something that is right and suitable for them or not. So not other people necessarily judging for them. They would have to do their homework, because marriage, and especially marriage, is unlike any other relationship. There are certain things that are not exposed to anyone else but between the two couples, or between this couple, and they would know the details that is hidden from everyone else. And this is extremely important to keep in mind. It's so easy for outsiders to judge the relationship and say, why did she get divorced? Why did she do this? But there are certain things that you have to give space for the person to look at the circumstance that you may not know of, and let them basically decide the relationship, and that let them decide whether it is the right thing for them or not. Because when we're speaking about marital relations, not everything is necessarily exposed to you, and therefore be humble in judging and making a certain judgment about our relationship and say, oh, but this person is so good. She wasn't making the right decisions. Why did she do this? And why did he do that? What you see on the outside and how people behave to the public, that's performance. And the way that people behave with their, let's say, spouse or at home, that really plays out differently than the performance you see on the outside. So be humble and learn how not to judge when a woman or when a man, they decided to end the relationship. Just be humble and know that there are certain ingredients that are not perhaps maybe visible to you, but they're visible to the spouse, and perhaps they couldn't tell you the bitterness of that ingredient that you are not aware of. So in that situation, we have to learn how to be humble and to basically let the people decide on their own. They could be suffering from that bitterness. And one person, even if you're talking about coffee, for example, some people like a black coffee, and you might be thinking, why would anybody want to taste something bitter? Why would anybody think that a bitter taste is a good taste? But remember, others might actually think of black coffee or a bitter taste that is actually good. So if we can just disagree on coffee, remember, people are a lot more complex than just a taste of coffee. Just be humble, and sometimes you just have to give people their own spaces to make the decisions of what they actually want in a relationship. Remember the story about the Prophet ﷺ when That woman came to the Prophet ﷺ and said four men had proposed to her, or three men actually proposed to her, and she said it was Usama ibn Zayd, and that was Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, and that was Abu Jahm. And then the Prophet ﷺ told her that Mu'adh ibn Abi Sufyan, صُعْلُوكٌ لَا مَالَ لَهُ. He's basically very poor, does not have enough money. And as for Abu Jahm, he told her, لا يضع عصاه عن عاتقه. He doesn't put his whipping stick down. In other words, that's a metaphor to say that he's a very abusive husband and does not recommend it for her. It does not recommend him for her. And then he recommended Usama ibn Zayd. Usama ibn Zayd, who's actually his considered kind of like a grandson, but his adopted from Zayd ibn Haritha, who was his actually adopted son. But he recommended Usama, who's actually the son of Zayd ibn Haritha. He recommended him to her basically, or recommended, yeah, exactly, recommended him to her. So just an idea, why didn't the Prophet ﷺ, if he had known already Abu Jahm to be an abusive man, why didn't he go to Abu Jahm and actually say, as a prophet and as a person that is acting on behalf of a government, we already know you're abusive and we're going to intervene and tell the women to basically stop you from all of this, and we're going to put an end to your behavior, etc. He didn't actually do that. And that's where it is the women's responsibility to come forward and say, you know what, I can't handle this relationship. I cannot handle this person, and I'd like to leave. And that's where sometimes you just have to give spaces to people. And that's when I would tell the women sometimes not too fast. If you know something about a relationship, don't necessarily think of yourself as a good Samaritan and just get involved and tell these women and give them free advice. Hey, you need to leave this relationship or you need to be in this relationship. And I would say, give them the space to decide on their own and let them be the ones to basically decide whether they want to be in this relationship or whether that's it, I cannot be patient any further. Let them decide on what they want to do. Let them at least know what spaces and what options they have and why you might recommend, why you might not recommend, etc. Let them see perhaps, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or 3 years from now, what this means, at least in implication on their life, and let them decide on what they want to do. Sometimes we rush in making decisions for people. Keep that one in mind. And sometimes, ladies, other people might give you recommendations, but they won't be out there when you basically get into that area. So let me give you an example. A woman or a therapist might recommend divorce for you. She recommended the divorce for you. It's such an easy decision to say, okay, that's it, I'll divorce. But then when it comes to finding a job, when it comes to perhaps maybe dealing with housing, dealing with money, dealing with all of that, then she's basically to her giving you an advice, etc. That is her job. But when it comes to dealing with the implications of that decision that she recommended for you, she's not the one that's going to pay the price for it. So there are certain things that you have to basically you have to basically do your homework in seeing whether you are capable of perhaps getting a job, perhaps finding the housing, perhaps dealing with the implications of divorce, etc. Because the person that is giving you the advice, they're just giving you a cheap advice and they're not going to be held accountable, at least in this life, for the advice. It's so easy to give a cheap advice. So it is your responsibility to do the homework and figure out the implications and what prices you'll end up paying. Just keep that one in mind. It's so easy for people left and right to give you a cheap advice. So don't necessarily think that anybody that is telling you to get out of this relationship is necessarily caring about your situation and is necessarily going to be there for a longer period of time and actually be there to give you that support that you're looking for. Just keep that one in mind. So I want you to think farther than just a year or a couple of months of what decision you're going to be making. Okay, so in general, definitely Islam is always recommending that there would be good terms that both the husband and the wife are living together based on, that he's basically covering the expenses, basically taking care of that relationship, and certainly that the wife is also not only compromising, but is also obedient to her husband on good terms. There are so many different evidences that actually speak of that. And of course, I'm just going to say some of those things. The number one, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ashiruhunna bil ma'ruf." The ayah basically, in general terms, is saying that the man is basically supposed to be dealing with the wife on good terms, and certainly is also motivating the husband that even sometimes when you may dislike some of that behavior, dislike some of the attitudes, dislike some of the things that probably the wife may have. And remember, one of the main books that I always recommend is Women Are From Venus and Men Are From Mars. Always recommend that book whenever there's a dispute between the husband and the wife. Sometimes we need to learn how men's brains work compared to women's brains. How men are thinking of numbers, men are thinking of a certain dynamic, certain rational thinking. Women are thinking of perhaps the emotions that blend, the emotions that relate to the relationship, and so forth. So just keeping that one in mind, sometimes what we need is to see beyond our own body, beyond our own brains, and to understand the other brain in front of us rather than be fixated on judging what's right and what's wrong. Sometimes, whether it's a man or a woman, we're fixated on judging whether this is right and whether this is wrong. And guess what? When we say something is right and wrong, sometimes our definition of right and wrong is fixated based on our vision. And our vision is not separated from the way our mind basically judges or our mind sees the world through. So, in other words, it's not necessarily all subjective, but a lot of what we would judge as right and wrong is not necessarily merely just an issue of right and wrong to meaning like a rational judgment, and many times that it's actually based on the way your brain is built to see the world. So keep that one in mind. In other words, your husband might actually say you're wrong, but she's not necessarily wrong. It's her brain is seeing the world from a certain lens that she was actually designed to see. And to her, you're completely wrong. And the same thing. You are basically designed to see the world in a certain angle, and that it's not necessarily wrong. It's, think of it as an elephant, and each one is describing basically based on the angle that they were designed to see. The angle that they are basically standing in that corner of that room. So each one is describing one side of that angle, and it's not necessarily wrong per se, but sometimes it's the angle of vision. Sometimes when we are inclusive and respecting one another, that will actually make a more comprehensive vision, a more detailed vision. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically made the household to be standing on two sides of the vision, two sides of sides to actually see things one from a rational, one from an emotional, one from one side of basically seeing, I guess, in numbers, the other side based on seeing the inspiration of things. Each one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically designed differently, but at the same time, we are asking both sides, the wife to basically be compromising with the husband and the husband to be basically compromising with the wife. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ even encouraged men, خِيَارُكُمْ خِيَارُكُمْ لِنِسَائِهِمْ. The best of you are the best to their wives, and you can say that this hadith is actually Hasanun Sahih. So, of course, this is a very comprehensive statement. What does it look like to actually be good? What does it look like to be a person that is considered on the best side? Are we talking about best side and I guess the way that we would handle maybe a woman's tantrum, a woman's back, you know, those times when she's probably at the backside of maybe her emotions, sometimes the low side of her tide of emotions, hormones, whatever it is, all those times. So that's basically a very comprehensive statement, whether the tide of a low tide or whether it's a high tide, whether she's going through those times when she's not feeling well or those times that she's going very well. So the Prophet ﷺ is laying out a very comprehensive statement and says, well, the best of you are actually the best, and when their manners at home are the best, not in public. It's so easy to be nice to the people on the street, nice to the people perhaps you're buying lemons from, down the street or whatever it is. It's so easy to look, I guess, in the best professional, the best performance. It's so easy because these people, you're just, I guess, coming in and giving a nice gesture. They don't really have your profile and all the details. You're just really giving a performance because your relationship is really, I guess, to at that moment to just buy lemons from and say thank you, and give a nice gesture, and that was the end of it. But at home, you basically have this space when you are probably at those moments that you're probably having a bad day, a bad attitude, and I guess sometimes you're just feeling relaxed or not relaxed, etc. That's really the place to judge really who you are, your akhlaq. That's why the Prophet ﷺ saying, when we're speaking about akhlaq, we're not talking about the akhlaq that you would do as a performance in a professional appearance on the outside, but the true akhlaq is to be judged and weighed of how it is at home. And that's the same thing. It's so easy to be nice and appear nice when you're in public, but when you're at home, that's really going to be the key, I guess, judgment, the key way. That's where we are supposed to be doing the real balance at home. How are you with your husband, with your children? What is your real akhlaq? What are your real akhlaq and khuluq at home? Just keep that one in mind. And that's the same thing. If you're talking about being humble, are you really humble with your husband? Or is it with your husband, you all of a sudden lose it and you want to say it's either my way or the highway? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ بِمَا حَفِظَ اللَّهِ. Salihah woman, a woman that is pious. It's so easy to be pious in perhaps maybe in public, putting on your hijab, putting on your niqab, but if basically you are objecting and you're so easy to be appearing like you are so humble when you're in public, but with your husband, you're every single moment, you're probably just being this woman that is objecting to everything, that doesn't want to be humble, that is basically refusing to obey her husband, etc. Well, that's where the real test of being humble comes in. The only reason why I'm basically following my husband's orders is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered me to do so. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered me to be obedient with my husband. So therefore, I'm just going to apply Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's orders. That's basically what فَصَالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ. حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ. Why حَافِظَاتُ لِلْغَيْبِ? Because it's so easy. It's so easy to just feel that I want to ventilate my husband's I guess shortcomings. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, well, no, I want you to emphasize, to learn how to maintain your own dignity, your own honor by not displaying your husband's shortcomings and thinking that this is my place of ventilation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us how to maintain our own dignity by maintaining the dignity of our homes, maintaining the dignity of our husbands, and maintaining our own dignity so we can basically live in an honorable state as well, not only in this dunya, but in the as well as in the akhirah. So you could see the hadith that speak about obedience, whether we're speaking about from the ayat, obedience to the husband, we've got ayat, and certainly we also have a hadith. Let's look at this one. The hadith says, and you could see this hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ said, if a man would invite his wife to the bed, basically, and she would refuse, then the malaika would and he was angry at her, then the malaika would basically be cursing her until morning. You could see this hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. So when are we talking about? We're talking about the circumstances when she is available Islamically. So let's say he's asking her while she's on her period. Well, I mean, foreplay is permitted outside of what is considered the area that is haram. So we're not going to go in details with that one. But at the end of the day, is that she is required Islamically within the parameter that there's no harm. So let's say her OBC or OB says that she's not supposed to have intercourse during that time. And of course, but he's insisting that he basically wants her to bed. Okay, you understand what I mean? I'm just going to use a metaphor here. Okay, so is she capable and is she permitted to not obey, at least for intercourse? The answer is absolutely. So as long as the parameter is within, let's say, one, Islamically permitted, two, we're speaking about something that does not bring her harm, then in that situation, she would have to obey. She would have to obey to basically that. Does she ever have the right to not obey? The answer is yes. When does she have the right to not obey? One, when there's physical harm. That's number one. لا ضرر ولا ضرار. Physical harm, she's basically, it's painful, or perhaps the doctors gave her a prescription not to basically have intercourse during that time. Or number three, if he's not giving her her rights. Not giving her her rights, then in that situation, she can say, I'm sorry, but you are not giving me my rights of perhaps maybe respect, or perhaps maybe financial rights, or perhaps, certain rights. She can say, I'm sorry, objection. You're not actually giving me my rights, and therefore, even my mahar. And therefore, I have the right to basically object, because this is my only way of telling you, objection. When I agreed to be married, that was on a condition that I would have my rights. But if you're not respecting me, you're not giving me my rights, then in that situation, I have the right. And part of those rights is basically the right to be in a place that is suitable. So let's just assume that she's in an area where she's not capable of, let's say, being in an area that he's capable of being intimate with her, but certain sounds are heard, or certain things that, or perhaps maybe other people are around, and these things. In that situation, you could say, I'm sorry, but I'm objecting to this, because this is not supposed to be something that other people are hearing the sounds of, or something that other people are probably going to be aware of, and all of that. And in that situation, she can say, I'm sorry, but modesty is not applied here, or at least honor is not applied here, or at least my rights are not applied here. And then she can object. Of course, sometimes we need to have, well, not sometimes, but always, we need to have integrity on how we judge this. It's so easy for a woman to say, oh, he's not giving me my rights, and therefore I'm going to object. And you further investigate and you realize that I guess she was being too elastic in judging the circumstance, and that it's basically, the narrative that she is creating in order to say, yeah, I'm not giving my rights, and therefore, yes, objection. And she wasn't actually being too fair, and sometimes he's not being too fair, and he just wants to make his own judgment of nushuz, and he'll call that nushuz, and therefore he can easily say, yeah, she's nashes, therefore I have the right to not spend on her, not give her the maintenance. So in that situation, when he's creating his own narrative of nushuz, she's refusing her husband's bed, and she's basically saying, well, I'm not refusing my husband's bed just because I want to refuse. Who would want to refuse? I'm basically refusing it because he's not giving me my rights in one, two, three issues. So in that situation, the qadi is supposed to be unbiased and listen to both sides, but you want to make sure, ladies, and especially ladies, don't be too explicit in revealing all the details in storytelling. I always emphasize on saying this because, ladies, a lot of times the detailed in storytelling and not these punctual points is going to, one, the qadi is not going to listen to all your storytelling. And even if you were to listen to your storytelling, guess what? You're going to find yourself getting outside of the perimeter, and even the qadi is not going to listen to the whole story. He's just waiting for you to finish up to get to the point. Learn how to get to the point. Ladies, please, before you go to the qadi, learn how to get to the point. Do not go in details with storytelling. The qadi does not have the time to learn and basically go in each and every single story and go in details with the stories and get into one story after another. The qadi wants a general statement. The qadi is not going to cover and is not going to judge on each and every single story. He's not going to judge each and every single story. Don't go in storytelling. One, my topic is this. Two, these are the issues that I'm complaining of. And learn how to bullet point. Okay, let's see. The other ahadith that basically speak of this. لو كنت آمرا أحدا أن يسجد لأحد لأمرت المرأة أن تسجد لزوجها. This hadith is actually authentic. If I ordered any woman to prostrate to anyone, I would have ordered the woman to prostrate to her husband. Does that mean a woman is supposed to worship her husband? Well, the hadith is pretty clear. It is not asking you to worship your husband, but this hadith is basically letting us know that obedience to the husband is going to be in this comprehensive way, as if we're speaking about the way that you would obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in each and every single area, to the point that the Prophet is saying, well, if I would have ordered anybody to prostrate and make sujood or worship, as an another statement, I would have ordered that to basically be done by the woman to her husband, but certainly the Prophet ﷺ did not. In other words, a woman does not worship her husband, but she is to obey him as long as three things are met. Number one, there's no harm. If he's ordering her for any harm, then in that situation, you do not have to harm yourself, no matter who this person is. Do not put yourself in harm. What kind of harm are we talking about? We're talking about physical harm. We're talking about psychological harm. But there has to be an amount of integrity, because who's to judge if this is psychological harm? If this is going to be psychologically harmful, of course, from one person to another it could be different. One woman can say, I'm sorry, but this is too much of a pressure on me, psychologically affecting me. This is too much of a harm. I cannot handle this. I'm going to basically consider it to me as abusive. Another woman might say, come on, it's not that abusive. You can have worse scenarios. Well, good for you if you're able to handle it and you don't want to consider it as abusive. I want to consider it as abusive, and I consider it as toxic. Okay, so if that situation is to her considered toxic and abusive and psychologically affecting her, then in that situation, we give her space to decide whether she wants to do sabr and be patient or not. And this is extremely important. What might be psychologically, let's say, draining to you, for someone else, I'll just do sabr here. Good for you. If you want to, that's up to you. But we cannot be asking every single person to basically do sabr. And that's why even Islam gave you the option to decide on whether you want to do sabr or whether you prefer to basically get out of this relationship, because to you, this is draining me psychologically. Okay? That's what I want to basically let you know the spaces. Should you do sabr? Now, if you were to go to a judge, or if you were to go to, let's say, a Muslim therapist, they'll usually be the ones to give you the recommendation to do sabr, and here's the reason why. Number one is that in general, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recommended that we would do sabr. That's the first one. In general, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recommended that we would do sabr. Two, what does sabr look like? Sabr is not something that is necessarily supposed to be comforting. When you speak of sabr, the word sabr actually has two meanings. The word sabr can actually mean to imprison yourself. The word sabr could also be metaphorically it's the fruit that basically has thorns in it, but deep on the inside there's a sweet fruit. Okay, so sometimes when you're looking at the metaphor of it, that there are definitely some thorns to probably end up getting pricked from, some certain areas that might not necessarily be so pleasant in their in the way that we might handle this. But at the end of the day, is that we just have to overcome and try to compromise and try to I guess learn how to adjust despite the thorns, despite the hardship, in order to get to the level of growing our ability to adjust, growing our ability to basically learn how to accommodate, to overcome our mind from getting fixated on the thorns, to perhaps waiting for those moments where we are capable of adjusting, and rather than getting fixated on the thorns, to probably wait on getting to the sweetness and getting to reaching a level of we're able to handle these hardships in order to live in a certain level of adjustment. Now, like I said, when we're speaking about sabr, that's why most of the scholars will actually recommend to us to be patient and just let us grow our capacity and let us learn how to grow within our capacities to become a person that is not necessarily giving in for each and every single hardship that we come across, but we grow in our capacity by learning how to adjust whenever a hardship basically is coming across in our life. We just learn how to adjust in those circumstances rather than just give up too soon. So that's what the scholars are usually doing. They're usually recommending that, hey, maybe you could figure out a different way to perhaps maybe solve this. Maybe there needs to be a certain level of adjustment. There's going to be some hardship. Just wait, etc. They'll recommend this. But it's you that determines whether you're capable of handling this or whether you want to give up sooner than that, and whether this is something that you are basically capable of handling or not. That's for you to determine. Because there's some information that the other person, even if he's a qadi, that you probably did not want to disclose every detail of it. That's your right. You might just want to insist, I've got some information that I would not like to disclose, but I would like to seek perhaps talaq due to harm, or whether you want to seek perhaps maybe il-khulu' and say, you know what, I'm done and here's my mahar. Or if he did not give you the mahar, it's okay, don't need the mahar anymore, I would like to move on with my life. And like we say, Allah sahal ali. Okay, so this is just to keep that note. And certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala generally says, الرجال قوم على النساء. We did talk about this ayah in details. And certainly when in situations, I want to look at this word right here, which can be, I guess, triggering for some. Let me give you the wording of it and I will explain it. This scholar, he basically said, and of course, this isn't necessarily his wording alone, but this is also the wording, the exact wording of a lot of the books of fiqh. وَقَدْ أَذِنَ اللَّهُ لِلْأَزْوَاجِ بِتَأْدِيبِ زَوْجَاتِهِمْ في حال نشوز الزوجة واستعصائها على زوجها بالوعظ والهجران والضرب. I'm going to quote this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted for the spouses to discipline, that's the word, to discipline their wives in the cases of the wife basically not behaving, or at least when she is becoming disobedient on her husband, basically in good terms and good words, or perhaps maybe abandoning their beds or even striking. Of course, this word right here, especially during our times, this is very, I guess, this is, what can I say, a very controversial statement, but let me explain a couple things. Number one, if we are to say بِتَأْدِيبِ زَوْجَاتِهِمْ, what does that mean? What do you mean the husband disciplining his wife? What does that even look like? Because the inference, if you were to say that he is going to discipline her, that would actually mean, one, she lacks discipline. Number two, that gives him the authority to somehow do what? To basically, use some kind of a pressure. So here, okay, giving her a lecture on good terms. Two, discipline by basically abandoning her sexually. And three, perhaps even using physical ways to basically get her on track. And number three, this is also carrying the inference that if she basically goes, when we're speaking about ta'deeb is this relating to perhaps maybe her taking off her hijab, for example, or is this relating to what kind of ta'deeb? Whose terms? What if she refused to, I don't know, serve him coffee? Can he say, lady, I just told you to bring me coffee and you didn't bring me the coffee? Can he say, okay, since you didn't give me coffee, and I'm just going to use the first one, I'm going to use the good terms and remind you how important it is to basically obey your husband. If you don't bring me coffee, I'm going to abandon you sexually, basically. And if you still refuse to bring me coffee, then I'm going to go to basically the third method, and I'm probably going to slap you. Is that what it means? No, that's not what it means. Okay, that's not what it means. Let me explain. I'm just going to go in details of this one. So some of this is actually cultural. Now, scholars debated on this particular statement, how far is her obedience supposed to go? And at the same time, they also debated whether we're speaking about the parameter of ta'deeb, of basically disciplining her, whether this actually involves just the area of deen. So we're speaking about, let's say she is not praying. I thought that was a relationship between her and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, according to many scholars, that no, that involves the husband to also discipline her to basically practice Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's orders. Let's say she refuses to wear hijab or refuses to wear it right, that he would have the responsibility to say, listen, I want you to wear the hijab properly. Your clothes are too light, or your clothes are sheer or too revealing, or etc. And that it would be his responsibility to make sure that he's putting in the discipline. I'm going to talk about, can she do the same or not, in just a bit. All right. So he can and he is obligated to basically use his authority to make sure that the home is also going in accordance with the, remember the D-N-A-I-M? So we're speaking about deen, that she's basically living based on the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. So that's his responsibility to also make sure that this home is going the direction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's deen. So if she's not wearing proper hijab, or she's probably using social media for the wrong reasons, it's his responsibility to say, you know what, I'm going to use these methods, and I'm going to get in details with that one. Going to use these methods. I'm going to lecture you on how important it is to basically be good in your deen. Let's go for the nafs. Okay, nafs. Let's say she's, harming herself physically. Let's say she's not eating right, she's not exercising, she's not, doing the right thing. And he's basically saying, listen, this is not right for you. And can he go as far as saying, you know what, I need you. I'm going to lecture. And then if you're still not obedient in this lecturing, then I'm going to basically start going to the Hajran piece of it. I'm going to talk about this in detail in just a bit. Number 3, we're speaking about al-aql. Let's say she is continuously basically having a tantrum, and this tantrum, she's basically all the time, she's yelling at the kids, she's yelling at everybody, and she's causing, this type of a tantrum at home and all of that. And then he's saying, you know what, you're continuously yelling. I need to basically pressure, and I need to tame down that tantrum of yours, because it's affecting everybody psychologically. The husband has the right and has the responsibility to say, okay, I'm going to use my power, my authority to get one of these, to basically get this home in a stable situation. And of course, let's say she's using social media to start talking to guys and, I don't know, doing these live sessions and all of these different things. And he says, no, this is not right. Number 5, money-wise. And she's basically wandering money. And he's like, wait a minute, we can't afford to buy these things. You're using the card that I gave you the wrong way. And of course, you would have the money management and how we understand and how we basically consider fair money management. She might consider him as being stingy. He might consider it as that's money management. And of course, then we might go into an agreement or a disagreement. But at the end of the day, of course, he has the power. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him the power to basically use these methods. Now, here's one thing. In the situation where we're disagreeing, let's say he says, hey, this is money management. And she says, no, this is not money management. You've got the money. He calls it money management. She calls him, you're being over stingy here. This is not really like this. Or he might say, well, let's give an example. She basically says, well, I'm all covered, and I want to swim, and there's no one seeing this area. And he says, no, I actually heard a sheikh say that this is qawarim al-murua. And she says, خوارم المروءة, if this was in public, if this was, when people are seeing this, but he's insisting, no, 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 you don't need to swim, and I don't want my wife swimming. There could be cameras, there could be this. And she says, but there aren't any cameras. What are you talking about? And of course, they would be debating this, or probably debating the parameters of it. And this happens often. They might be debating whether this really is permissible or not permissible, or whether this is following the rules of muru'ah, or chivalry, or honesty, or whatever it is. And, they can debate the parameters of it. So in that situation, sometimes I would say, ladies, if we're going to debate each and every single thing, this is going to be bringing an end to the relationship. And same thing I would tell the guys. Not always do you always have to be right on everything. You don't always have to be right on everything. Sometimes we need to compromise, and sometimes just give spaces to the other person. We don't always have to have it our way or the highway, but at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is definitely emphasizing, asking the women to actually be more compromising than the men. There's no question about that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ الدَّرَجَةِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that women are asked to compromise a degree more than what the men are asked to compromise to women in. So just keep that one in mind. Yes, there's no misogyny in this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, alhamdulillah, created women to be capable of being compromising more than the men themselves. So sometimes don't want you getting too fixated on the argument, because you want to remember winning the heart is more important than winning the argument. If you're just so fixated on winning the argument in each and every single argument, trust me, you're going to lose the person in front of you. Just have to learn sometimes how to be compromising, how to give in, because winning the relationship and winning the heart in that relationship is more important than perhaps maybe, I don't know, soaking your feet in the water in the pool, or probably getting the right coffee, or eating at a restaurant, or whatever it is. Trust me, winning the relationship is more important than this and that argument. Just keeping that one in mind. All right. Alhamdulillah. Okay, يهديكم ويصلح بالكم, for all those that had actually said يرحمكم الله. Okay, now I want to further discuss, when we're speaking about al-wa'dh, what does al-wa'dh actually look like? So al-wa'dh is a general statement which actually means speaking kindly. So what does that look like? That looks like giving her perhaps words of kindness, perhaps reminding her the importance of obeying the husband, perhaps reminding her of the reward of compromising, perhaps reminding her of how important it is to live in winning the relationship. Sometimes just reminding her of the reward in Jannah, etc. That's al-wa'dh. Okay. And al-hujran. How far can the hujran actually go? And that's another that's another thing to discuss, because when we're speaking about hujran, I thought it would be a good idea to actually take you to this hadith. This is probably one of the most controversial hadith that basically discuss this. Okay, this is the hadith right there. So you could see this hadith, Hakim ibn Muawiyah. So what happened? He basically said, "Oh, Prophet of Allah, ما حق زوج أحدنا عليه?" What is basically are the rights of our spouse upon us? So he responded, تطعمها إذا أكلت. You would feed her if you eat. In other words, she's eating with you, not you eat perhaps maybe the expensive foods, and you're like, you know what, all my responsibility is just to give you an amount of food, so I'll give you lentils and I'll basically be eating the meat. That's not تطعمها إذا أكلت. It's not, oh, I'm just giving you something to survive on. No, that's not what it is. تطعمها إذا أكلت, meaning that when we're speaking about food, we're basically letting you know that you have to share of the same meal, you have to share of the same household, the security, etc. In other words, it's an honorable living. Not that you're telling her, see, you're lucky I'm feeding you. You're lucky I'm giving you this. Because remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had warned that this sadaqah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا صَدَقَاتِكُمْ بِالْمَنِّ وَالْأَذَى, and do not void and do not cancel out the sadaqah or the good that you would do بِالْمَنِّ وَالْأَذَى. What is ilman? Ilman is bragging. Remember, I did this to you. Remember, this is what I did to you. Remember, I compromised on this and I compromised on that, and etc. And then by doing that, you just aren't going to cancel out. That's the same thing that you might be doing as a husband. Remember, you're lucky I'm feeding you. See, I'm basically doing this to you and I'm doing that to you, and etc. And then you're basically canceling out the good because you are just bragging. Or al-adha. Al-adha is a way that, yeah, because I see that I've got some kind of a favor upon you, that somehow I want to put you down and make you feel that you cannot live without me. That's al-adha. It's a way to abuse the person by degrading them. That's al-adha. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was, or the Prophet ﷺ was emphasizing تطعمها إذا أكلت, that you would feed her if you eat. In other words, give her dignity. Give her dignity like she is living with you. تكسوها إذا اكتسيت. And you would clothe her from the clothing that you would buy. Not you buying name brands and her buying probably, I don't know, from a thrift store and say, okay, I gave you, hey, it's all about what clothes. Here it is, but you're buying the name brands up there. وَلَا تَضْرُبِ الْوَجْهِ. And of course, certainly, if you were needing to go to the level of probably wanting to discipline. Yes, the word is discipline because he has the authority to get the wife and the children basically on track to get to Jannah. وَلَا تَضْرُبِ الْوَجْهِ. And do not strike on the face. Do not strike on the face. In other words, beat the face in any way. وَلَا تُقَبِّحْ. What is وَلَا تُقَبِّحْ? وَلَا تُقَبِّحْ meaning to say things like, look at you, you look ugly, you are this, you are, speaking of perhaps maybe, speaking of putting her down, condescending statements, whether it's on her clothes, on her appearance, on her weight, shaming, or probably, speaking ill about her family, speaking ill about her, etc. That's basically taqbih. Taqbih is to say condescending statement to make her feel bad about herself. That's it, taqbih. Then therefore, when we're speaking about that taqbih, that's basically not giving her her rights. وَلَا تَهْجُرْ إِلَّا فِي الْبَيْتِ. And if you were to abandon basically at home, or sorry, if you were to abandon basically the bed, then it would only be at home. Now, here's one thing. Some of these are actually controversial between scholars. Let me explain a number of different ones, at least this piece of it. لا تهجر إلا في البيت. There are differences of opinions between scholars whether he can actually abandon the household. Let's say she is exceeding the limit and basically not being obedient to her husband, and he's doing all that he's supposed to be doing, but then she's not being obedient. She's doing the shoes. Can he actually abandon the household? In other words, I don't know, go sleep at a hotel or probably his other wife's house, etc. And can he actually do that? That's another issue of differences of opinions between scholars. But there's a hadith. Why would they have differences of opinions here? So there are differences of opinions because there's another hadith that actually contradicts this one. Wait, why would it contradict it? So it would contradict it when some scholars actually said we're looking at the circumstances. Other scholars, they considered one of them is more authentic than the other. In number three, and other scholars, they basically looked at these ahadith and looked at it, is this dependent on the circumstance, or what is the situation? Why did these two ahadith basically contradict one another, or do they not contradict one another? But this is actually looking at the circumstances, and basically in certain extreme circumstances, he might actually have the right to say, you know what, I don't want to go up to the level of divorce, but I will basically separate. We'll separate for the time being, and then we'll probably see if this isn't working, then we'll probably, I guess, going to a second stage, which is, you know what, fully bringing a marriage resolution. Okay, so just wanted to bring that one right there, letting you see it. I would go in lots of details, so I'm just going to let you see this hadith right there, and I guess this piece of it, لا تضرب الوجه, maybe لا تضرب الوجه. Can the wife actually do the same? Can the wife say, you know what, I'm here feeding you, and I'm here, giving you everything? Well, no, because she's not the one responsible to bring food to the table. I'm not talking about bring food to the table, meaning here I am cooking and I'm going to basically bring food to the table. But in general, there, when you look back in history, I want you to see the circumstances that related these ahadith. Let me explain. The question is, does the wife have to obey her husband and actually, I don't know, let's say he says, I'm coming at 8 tonight. I expect the food to be ready. And she says, well, I cooked the food. Now it's your turn to, I guess, do the catering piece of it. The food is on the stove, it's cooked and it's all set, but then you basically have to serve yourself, I don't know, make yourself at home, whatever it is, and basically scoop the food and it's on the table and basically put everything. Now, scholars actually had differences of opinions on whether she is supposed to be, one, serving to mean serving all the way to basically probably put it on the table and do all those details, okay, of maybe even cooking. Why would they have differences of opinions? Number one is that this wasn't a debate during the time of the Sahaba at all. Women were generally, serving the husbands, and it was something that they lived and didn't even question. They didn't even question it. It was basically like a common sense for them. Yet the later generations, they questioned whether this is part of her duties as a wife, because the circumstances changed. They started having maids, there was an abundance in money, etc. And this is one thing, is that when money comes in, usually it makes the relationship more sophisticated. Why? Because then we start to question whether this is our responsibility or not. The simpler the relationship, you could see people doing a better job in understanding their roles than in situations where we have our life easier. It becomes harder to understand sometimes our social dynamic, our responsibilities, where it begins, where it ends, and then we seem to confuse our roles and responsibilities and our rights, and then we seem to lose our parameters right there, and we seem to lose our understanding of where things begin and where they end. And that's what happened. Even during our times, when we had more education, you would see more education, the higher the education, the more likely that the marriages will basically not work out. The more money, the more likely the marriage is not going to work out. The higher the social status, the more likely the marriage is not going to work out. You would see marriage relations that basically in the area of traditional, less education, less money, less social status, they basically work out better. Why? Because we basically figure out our roles better when it's a simpler relationship, when we basically need one another. So we end up knowing how to depend on one another and why we need the other person. And therefore, the less independence, the more we are feeling, I need to depend on the other person. Therefore, I will compromise because I need the other person. So the more independence, whether education-wise, money, social, etc., the less we feel that we need someone else to depend on. And the higher the chances and the probability of seeking a divorce and marriage falling apart basically happening. And that's why you would also see divorce rates going up beyond the age of 40 in women. You would have a higher chance in women getting divorced after the age of 40 than younger, because certainly we're seeing menopause basically right there playing a major role in of course, bringing in the less desire, probably less estrogen, whatever it is, and certainly dependence on her husband. Don't need him anymore as much as she needed him before. And you would see by almost 43% will the divorce rate after the age of 40 in women actually go up higher. This is real. Her body is changing, and therefore her need to her husband starts reducing. And that's when she decides, well, who needs this? No thanks. She'll basically decide to jump out of the wagon. Later, she probably might regret it. And this happens a lot of times. She might regret it. Why did I jump out of the wagon? Everything was working fine. He was a good man. I guess I didn't think of it. I didn't see it that way. I didn't think of it like this at the time. But at the end of the day, there are a number of different factors that Islam is asking us, wait a minute, don't think with your emotions. Don't let your hormones think for you. We want you to look at the circumstances and actually look and determine the circumstances of how well they are functioning and not look at the emotions of it. Anyhow, so just trying to look at it from that angle. And certainly, what if we're looking at, does she have to serve her husband? Does she not have to serve her husband? And of course, like I said, the relationship between husband and wife, it started going historically more complex because of the abundance of wealth, the abundance of maids and servants that were coming in the Islamic government. We're talking about the 5th century, 6th century Hijriya. That's when things started going differently. And then scholars would use the circumstances at the time to really question, does the wife have to serve her husband, or is that his responsibility to bring a maid or not? But that debate was not existent in the earlier relationships. The Sahaba did not at all discuss this. The Sahaba did not debate this. This was not even a question. The life was a lot simpler than going into these questions and basically wondering whether it is my responsibility or not. But later, when life became easier, that's when we started going into ways of making our life harder. So when you see right now, a lot of the perhaps dua. They'll be saying things like the scholars basically said the wife does not have to serve her husband, and the wife is this. They're actually taking a debate that was not even discussed by even the Sahaba or the Prophet ﷺ. And then it was in a circumstance that was probably different than today. And then we would take that debate and apply it in a completely different circumstance. Just want to keep heads up in order for us to understand the context. Remember, in fiqh, we say, al-hukmu ala shay'i far'un an tasawwurihi. When you want to make a judgment on any matter, part of it is that you have to understand the circumstances of that debate back then, and when this happened, and how this debate basically had those circumstances that surrounded that debate. So during our times, when people would question, does she really have to serve her husband? Does she really have to, really fix the table and put, I don't know, perhaps candles and probably, I don't know, salad and protein and cook? And how far is that? We don't actually have a hadith that says, this is how far that serving goes, and this is how far her obedience should be up to the level of what and his request and all of that. There isn't a particular hadith or a particular ayah. The hadith and ayat were really making a general statement. Now, that's for you to basically discuss together, and for both of you to understand the parameters, but just to keep in mind, the more you get into these debates, the harder the relationship is going to get. There are certain things that we just have to live in winning the heart, not winning the argument. And remember, traditional marriages, the way our grandmothers had lived in traditional marriages, she was basically, I guess, making, I don't know, the pie and, cooking and making all the different things at home and making the home be a cozy place for everyone. It was actually making happier marriages than the marriage of today, where we're questioning whether this is my right, this is your responsibility, etc. Because the time that we question each and every single thing, that's when it becomes a place of battle, a place of not making houses be homes, but houses become battlefields. The second that those houses become an area of a battlefield, we're arguing about a dish, and we're arguing about a relationship, and we're arguing about my right, your right. Was your voice a high pitch? Was it low pitch? No, this is what you meant. This is your intention. It becomes boring. The relationship becomes sickening. The relationship becomes draining. It becomes a place of anxiety and not a place of tranquility. And certainly you might say, well, let him stop first. And he might say, well, let her stop first. I will say, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not change. Both of you, each and every single one of you, is supposed to think, I have to change, not the other person has to change. Because the second that you keep on saying she has to change or he has to change, that's when I will guarantee you this is never going to end. But if you start with yourself, you will see that you will mirror the other person. You focus on changing, and the other person will automatically become a person that will mirror you. This is part of our nature. If you start laughing, the other person's going to start laughing, even if they don't even understand the joke. Even if they don't understand what you're saying, they're going to start laughing. If you're going to start crying, the other person's going to start crying, even though they might not understand what you're crying about. But they just hear you sobbing. The other person's going to cry. Unless these people were basically, I guess, really these toxic people that didn't even know how to relate to other people's emotions and relate to other people, and they were really people that are sick. That's a different story. People that would enjoy seeing people crying. These are sick people. Enjoy seeing people in pain. These are sick people. That's a different situation. This is a narcissist level that basically is there's no way to cure this person unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hidayah is put into this person. Okay, now going back to this hadith, I can see people wanting to ask questions. So if there is anybody that would like to ask questions before we continue, that's okay too. I don't mind, if somebody wants to say anything in regards to this one. Let's see right here. تكسوها إذا اكتسيت, basically whatever she is needing in terms of we're just going into the explanation of this hadith. Let's look at this one. ولا تقبح. And تقبح basically means, don't say condescending statements. So we're talking about using words that you're trying to, condescend her, or basically making fun of the way she talks, making fun of the way she behaves, or making fun of her appearance, or making fun. That's basically that تقبيح. لا تجر إلا في البيت, we just explained it. And the reason why they had, okay, can he basically do that hujran? Can he basically abandon her? Is it abandoning her sexually only? Or is this abandoning the bed? What does abandoning the bed actually mean? So they're both sleeping on the bed. And then he basically, you know what? I'm angry at you, turned the back on her. Turn his back on her, basically. He's there. Is that the limit of wahjuruhunna fil madaja, to basically abandoning meaning sleeping on the other side, for example? Or probably, I don't know, sleeping perhaps maybe in another room, on the couch maybe? Okay, what's happening? Then, of course, the scholars of tafsir actually had differences of opinions on that one. Some actually said, well, it goes up to the level of not even sleeping in the same room. And some actually said, well, it's basically that he would abandon her sexually. And other scholars actually said, well, no, it's just to turn his back on her. And others actually said to abandon her completely sexually, basically, right there. Or others actually said, no, that he would, this was quite interesting, that he would not abandon her sexually, but would not talk to her. I don't know how that works, but whatever. All right. And the third one, or actually not the third, this is more than the third. This one's really weird. They said that actually means to say condescending statements to her. That this is what al-hajr means. In other words, من الكلام القبيح. Okay, let me correct this. Not to say condescending statements, but say harsh words. So in other words, being, I guess, what does a harsh word actually mean? So are we saying statements that are probably strong in power, or powerful statements? Are we talking about condescending statements like putting her down? Or are we saying things like, hey, you should know better, or say, that's a condescending statement, isn't it? So أغلظوا لهن في القول. You're basically being what, authoritative, strong statement. You're letting her know your limits. Okay, maybe, perhaps. Okay, let's see. The strangest one is this one, which scholars and majority of the scholars, they really went against this one. And look at this one. Okay, this one's really strange that even the scholars, like Ibn al-Arabi said, that's not true and that's not right. And look at this one. It's basically, this is, who is that? That's basically Tabari. He said, well, al-hajr is from what ties, what you tie with. In other words, the rope that you would tie a camel with. and therefore tie them up in the houses and strike them. Wait, of course, Tabari said this, and you could see the other scholars, they said, no, 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 absolutely gone wrong. You could say Ibn al-Arabi and al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, he said, no, no, that is really a wrong explanation to this. And they basically said, no, no, this is definitely wrong. I want to explain one thing. Not everything that you might have in the books of tafsir is necessarily going to be that that's what Islam says. Okay? So you can have a scholar have, I would say, an extreme interpretation and an interpretation gone wrong. And that's when you would see scholars objecting to it, just like, for example, this interpretation. Just keep that one in mind, that even scholars do make mistakes. But what you end up really having sometimes is people misunderstanding and taking, I would say, a statement and saying, hey, look, there's a scholar and here's what he said. Therefore, I'm going to tie this woman up and basically start beating her in order to get her on track. Hey, I've got an evidence that Tabari said this. And we're going to say, wait a minute, but you have the other scholars, they objected and they said that this is not what the ayah says, and this is misunderstanding that ayah. And you had a number of different scholars actually explain how this is actually not an accurate interpretation. So just to keep you, in that note, for us to understand things, not because a scholar said a statement, that doesn't make it necessarily that that's what Islam says. Just keep that one in mind. Not because a scholar said a statement, that doesn't make it that's what Islam says. What Islam says is basically the Quran and Sunnah. But he's trying to explain something in the Quran, which is the word hajara, right? But just because he explained it that way, that doesn't make it the Quran, unless all the scholars, they basically had endorsed that interpretation. No scholar endorsed that interpretation. Therefore, we're going to say, well, I mean, nice try. We're not going to take that interpretation because it was not endorsed by other scholars, just to let you know. Okay, so that situation, just keeping that one in mind. And you could see there is another hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, in this hadith is basically Muawiyah ibn Haydar, right there, that غير ألا تهجر إلا في البيت, that the person would only do that il-hujran basically at home. And certainly that was the debate. And they basically, of course, then is it permissible that he would do that abandonment in other than the home, and what does that look like? And certainly just to keep that one in mind. And let's say right there, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, basically he said لا تهجر إلا في البيت, and he basically had noted another hadith that was actually a long hadith, which basically is hadith أخرجه أحمد, Abu Dawud, and Al-Kharaiti. Okay, right there, hold on, I'm just gonna make the story short right there. And let's say I'm gonna get to those points. I'm trying to, make the story not too long and making it short, and at the same time, okay, let's see. What do we benefit out of this hadith? He said that it is obligatory that the man would basically spend on the wife and cover her needs, and that is within his capacity, and that it would be permissible, and it is the husband's responsibility to maintain the household. Now, any type of hitting is not supposed to leave any bruises on the body. So what are we talking about, bruises on the body? Whether we're speaking about puncturing, whether blue eye, or bruises, meaning bruises on the body like ecchymosis, or probably blue lines, blue marks, or whatever it is, or probably scratches or bites, or probably using perhaps ways of maybe ripping the hair, any of those types of hitting is not allowed, whether you're puncturing the body or whether you're scratching the body, or whether you're bruising the body, or whether you're striking the body, or whether you're slapping on the face, or probably in the groins, or probably beating in those ways, that's not permissible. And in fact, there are a number of ahadith that have, well, it's really one story. Let me say the story. So the story when that ayah was revealed, about that ayah, الرجال قوامون على النساء, etc., a number of different sahabiyat, they went to the Prophet ﷺ's wives and they started complaining to the Prophet ﷺ's wives, and to say that Aisha in particular, that a number of different Sahaba, they basically started beating their wives, and they went to complain to the Prophet ﷺ that our husbands are beating us. That's when the Prophet ﷺ said, وَلَا يَضْرِبُ خِيَارَكُمْ, and the best of you do not beat their wives. And the Prophet ﷺ made a clear statement that the darb, or the beating, is غَيْرَ مُبَرِّح. In other words, it doesn't even, when you say غَيْرَ مُبَرِّح means it is not striking, not the face, not the head, not the groins, and certainly not the abdomen, and certainly not leaving any bruises, not leaving any marks on the body, not puncturing the body, not breaking the bones, not leaving any bruises, meaning not making any marks on the body. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ had explained it's like getting a siwak, basically kind of like a straw, and just more of a metaphorical type of striking than actually harming the body or harming the woman. In other words, the word beating is not basically going to be the right statement or the right word to use for the word daraba. Because if you're not harming the body, and you're not bruising, and you're not striking, that is the definition. Of course, what does to beat mean? To beat means you're leaving bruises, you're leaving marks, which Islam basically considers as haram. So therefore, even the word daraba cannot be translated as beating. Striking, even striking, cannot be translated here, or it cannot be even translated into that as well. So this is more metaphorical than an actual beating. If you cannot handle living with her, well, then don't go and start basically trespassing those boundaries. And that's why Ata ibn Abi Rabah, he basically went farther in explaining this, and he said, وَلَا يَضْرِبُ خِيَارَكُمْ is not necessarily abrogating the ayah, but he said that was letting the men know that, you know what, it's best to not even go that direction, but at the same time, it sometimes may be a better option than getting a divorce. So just letting you know these parameters. And let's say, okay, so let's say right there, then that the husband should not be, I guess, condescending and hurting the wife psychologically and all of that. And of course, that he should not be hitting the face whatsoever. And of course, it's not just the face, but we're speaking about other sides that we just explained. And certainly that the husband has the right to abandon her sexually in to the level of what he would see is suitable to basically put her on the track of the limit of Islam. And we're speaking about deen, nafs, aql, ird, mal, and also his policies as well, as he sees fit. And at the end of the day, if she says, sorry, but I'm not going to be within that, I'm not going to live like that, and she would have the right to say, don't want this. Okay. And like I said, it's their call to see whether this is something that they are interested in or not. Oh, there we go. So here's a question. Can we remind our kids of the favor we give them so that they be grateful and reflect, or doing so also erases the deed? Very, very good question. Yes, sometimes, remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ, with the blessings, sometimes you have to tell others with the ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes you need the children to know what blessing they're living in. You're lucky to have food on the table. You're lucky to basically see the blessing that they are living in as not a way to necessarily make them feel, dishonored, but sometimes to let them see the blessing. Of course, this is a way it's not bragging, but it's basically letting them see the blessing because they may not recognize it. They may not recognize it, so sometimes we need to tell our children, you see the food that's in front of you? That's why you need to be thankful that you have parents to make this available to you. Alhamdulillah that you have this, and it is the parents sometimes that for the children, they might actually feel entitled that this is your responsibility and therefore you basically have to do it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that's not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about it. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, حَمَلَتْ أُمُّهُ كُرًّا وَوَضَعْتُهُ كُرًّا. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala letting them know? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting them know, listen, she was pregnant with you, and it was extremely hard on her. She had you with extreme pain. She took care of you. She did this to you. She did this to you. What is that? That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala letting them know that you did not get this far without the efforts invested in your life. So sometimes we have to let them know that they're not entitled to have it, but they are basically supposed to be thankful. And part of being thankful is being capable of seeing it and seeing it exist in their life. If you do not see it existing in your life, if you do not see it, you're going to consider that, oh, I'm entitled to have it. I have to have it. And what we're seeing today in the West is that children growing up to say, well, it's your responsibility. You got us. You basically bore us. We didn't tell you to bring us into this life. And that's what we're seeing today as entitled kids to basically think that it's your responsibility anyway. So therefore, don't expect that I have to be thankful to you. In Islam, no. من لا يشكر الناس لا يشكر الله. If they're not thankful to the people that are around them, then they're not going to be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So sometimes, yes, it is necessary sometimes to let the children recognize the good things, the blessings that they're basically surrounding them because they have to see it. If they don't see it, they're not going to be thankful. That does not necessarily contradict. I know we're living in a society where, oh no, don't let the kids feel that they're supposed to be feeling that their life is basically, you love them all the time and you're always supposed to be telling them about how much you love them and that this is supposed to be your responsibility to provide for them. Don't necessarily make them feel that they have to pay you back. Yes, they do. Why aren't they supposed to not pay back when they grow up to basically pay back in return for all that their mother and father had done to them? Isn't that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them? Hey, your mother served you this way, then therefore now it's your turn to pay back. In وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Here it is, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's terms. He had decreed that you would be good, that you would obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and for the parents, it would be وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, and for the parents, that you would act in good terms. What if they harm me? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you would basically have to accompany them in good terms. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling you that, yes, you have the responsibility to pay back. Now we're seeing people actually saying, oh no, don't let the children feel that they have to pay you back. It's okay. They can just put their parents in senior homes. And no, wait a minute. Why we're going that direction now. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying no. They have to understand that, yes, they have something to pay back for. Just by your parents, bringing you to this world and taking care of you as a baby. You may not remember it. Then you have a responsibility when they grow older to take care of them. Whether they need housing, whether they need food, whether they need care, whether they need that time when you probably get into dementia, they have a responsibility. وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. The word ihsan is basically unidentified, that it is your responsibility to basically be there in giving them the best of the ihsan ever. Not adl, but ihsan. Ihsan is to give unlimited, to be unlimited in the giving, in your giving, to be unlimited in the care, to be unlimited in the amount of mercy, in the amount of in affection that you would give to your parents. This is it. So this actually brings the end of our fiqh of marriage. If there are any questions, my friends, go ahead. I think we covered each and every single thing. Oh, actually, we didn't talk about child support. We didn't talk about child support, and yeah, so tomorrow, no, we forgot to talk about child support. So we'll talk about child custody and child support tomorrow. That's just going to be, it's not going to be very long, but we'll talk about it tomorrow. If there are any questions, my friends, you can go ahead and inshallah, we'll be capable of answering. So inshallah, let me just pause, I guess, the live stream.